I'm 32, and I still remember the exact pitch of my sister's laughter that night. It cut through the noise of clinking glasses and fake cheer like a blade. "Let's toast to my brother," she said, voice dripping with amusement, still the family's biggest disappointment. Everyone at the Christmas table laughed, even my parents. My mom covered her mouth, pretending to scold my sister. "Oh, Emma, don't tease your brother." But she was smiling. Dad actually raised his glass and said, "To tradition." They all drank. I sat there with my wine untouched, my smile tight, my heart pounding against my ribs. I wanted to say something, anything, but I'd done that before. Every time I spoke up, I was told I was too sensitive, that I should learn to take a joke. So I smiled instead. I poured my drink, looked at each of them, and said calmly, "Enjoy it. This is the last holiday I'll ever spend with you." Then I stood up, left the table, and walked out the front door without another word. But let me back up, because that moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was years, decades of build-up. My name's Daniel. I grew up in a family that treated success like a scoreboard, and I was always the one who didn't measure up. My dad owned a construction company, a big one in our state. He started it from scratch when he was 23, and by the time I was born, he already had multiple crews, trucks, and a nice house with a view of the river. To him, success was everything. And failure, well, that was me. I wasn't bad at anything in particular. I just wasn't Emma. She was 3 years younger, but somehow always 10 steps ahead in their eyes. Straight as, debate team captain, Ivy League graduate. She had this way of talking that made adults lean in and listen, while I was the kid who needed to find his passion. When I was 17, I told Dad I wanted to go into architecture. I'd always been fascinated by the design side of his business, how structures came together, how something on paper could become real. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Architects don't make money unless they're famous. Stick to construction, where the real work happens." I did. I went to a local college, got a degree in business management, and joined his company after graduation. I started at the bottom, literally sweeping the floors of our main warehouse, and worked my way up to project coordinator. I thought he'd respect that maybe if I worked hard enough, I'd finally earn his approval. But every time I did something right, Emma did something extraordinary. When I landed a new client, she got published in a business magazine. When I handled a $1 million project flawlessly, she gave a TEDx talk about women in leadership, and Dad sent the link to everyone he knew. She didn't even work in the same industry. She was in finance. But somehow, she always managed to tie herself to his success story. My dad taught me everything about ambition, she'd say in interviews. Not once did she mention me. Still, I kept showing up. I kept putting in the hours, dealing with stubborn clients, late invoices, broken equipment, all the stuff Dad didn't have time for anymore. I thought one day he'd see that I was the one actually keeping things running. Then last year, he set up what he called the Family Business Fund. The idea was to create a joint investment pool between the three of us, him, Emma, and me, to expand into property development. Each of us would contribute a certain amount, and profits would be split proportionally. It sounded fair enough at first, until I saw the fine print. Emma's contribution? Half of mine. Her share of the profits? The same as mine. When I pointed it out, Dad said, "She's bringing her expertise and her network. You're bringing sweat. It balances out." I remember sitting there in his office, the walls lined with old photographs of construction sites and blueprints, thinking how ironic it was that the man who taught me hard work beats everything suddenly decided that hard work didn't count. I almost walked away then. I should have, but something in me wanted to prove him wrong. I signed the contract. I put in the money. For months, I worked double shifts while Emma consulted. She showed up to one meeting, offered vague advice about diversifying assets, and then disappeared again. Meanwhile, I managed crews, negotiated with suppliers, and handled site delays. And when the first property finally went on the market, it was me who had secured the permits, organized the contractors, and made sure everything stayed under budget. When the profit reports came in, Dad hosted a dinner to celebrate. That was the first time I noticed the shift. Emma's name was on every congratulatory speech. Emma's insights really paid off, Dad said. Emma's financial strategies saved us. I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, thinking, what insights? She hadn't even seen the property. After dinner, I pulled him aside. I told him the truth, that I'd handled the entire thing. That if it weren't for me, the The project would have collapsed before breaking ground. He didn't even look surprised. "That's what you're supposed to do, son," he said. "You're the worker. She's the visionary." That night, I drove home in silence. I didn't even turn the radio on. I just stared out at the road and realized that no matter what I did, I'd never stop being the disappointment. So when Christmas came around, I already knew what kind of night it was going to be. My parents' house looked like something out of a holiday commercial. Warm lights, expensive decorations, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon. Emma arrived late, wearing a designer coat and carrying gifts that looked like they came from a luxury store window. Everyone rushed to greet her, as if she were royalty. When I handed Mom the wine I brought, she smiled politely and said, "Oh, you didn't have to bring anything, honey. Emma already took care of the drinks." Then she set my bottle aside, unopened. Dinner was worse. Every conversation somehow circled back to Emma's job, her apartment in New York, her new boyfriend, who was such a gentleman. I tried to chime in once, mentioned a new contract I'd closed with a real estate developer, but Dad interrupted me mid-sentence to ask Emma about her upcoming presentation in Chicago. The whole table turned toward her, and just like that, I was invisible again. Then came the toast. She lifted her glass, looked right at me, and said that line I'll never forget. "Let's toast to my brother, still the family's biggest disappointment." It was the kind of line that sounds like a joke to everyone else, but feels like a punch to the stomach when it's aimed at you. And the laughter that followed, that was the part that broke something inside me. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just smiled, poured my drink, and told them to enjoy it, because it was the last holiday I'd ever spend with them. When I left, no one stopped me. Not even Mom. She just said, "Don't be dramatic, Daniel. It's Christmas." But 2 days later, everything changed. I was at my office, sorting through some files, when my phone rang. It was Emma. Her voice was shaky. "Daniel," she said, "you didn't pull out of Dad's business fund, did you?" I looked down at the contract sitting on my desk, the one I'd been reviewing all morning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. I didn't answer her right away. I just let the silence stretch. Because in that moment, I realized she finally understood something I'd known for years. Without me, none of it worked. And as I picked up my pen and looked at the signature line, a small, almost imperceptible smile crept across my face. That's where things started to shift. After that Christmas night, everything between us became quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the sort that hums under your skin, the kind that means something's about to give. My parents didn't call. Emma didn't text. It was as if my absence was easier for them than my presence ever was. And honestly, I thought I was fine with that. For a while, I even convinced myself I didn't care. But silence has a funny way of forcing you to think. When I walked out that night, I didn't just leave a house. I left a lifetime of trying to earn approval that was never coming. Still, part of me kept wondering if they'd reach out, if maybe this time someone would realize they'd gone too far. They didn't. A week after Christmas, my father sent a group message titled "Quick Business Check-In." No "hope you're well," no acknowledgement of what happened, just numbers and deadlines. That's who he was. Feelings didn't belong in business, and unfortunately, our family ran like one. I didn't reply. Not immediately. I wanted him to feel what it was like when someone you relied on went silent. And apparently, that silence rattled him more than I expected, because the next day, he called me directly. "Daniel," he said, tone clipped, like we were in a meeting. "We need to finalize the numbers for the new development. I assume you're still on board." I leaned back in my chair. "I don't know. I've been thinking about stepping back." "Stepping back." His voice tightened. "You can't just walk away in the middle of a project." "I can," I said evenly. "It's my money in the fund, not yours." He exhaled sharply. "It's our money, Daniel. Don't make this about pride. You've always had a tendency to take things personally." I almost laughed. Take things personally? After years of being treated like a placeholder in my own father's company? "Maybe that's because it is personal, Dad," I said quietly. "You've made sure of that." He didn't respond. Just hung up. That's when I knew I'd struck a nerve. The following days were strange. I went into the office and noticed small shifts. My access to certain files had been restricted. The financial dashboard I used to track our investments suddenly required administrator approval. The admin? Emma. When I confronted the accountant, a nervous man named Robert who had worked for Dad for 15 years, he stammered something about new internal controls and Emma's request. She said it's just temporary, he murmured, avoiding eye contact. I nodded slowly. Right, temporary. By the end of the week, I realized what they were doing. They were freezing me out, quietly, strategically, like I was a liability. And I might have accepted that if it weren't for the company retreat. It was in late January, held at one of the new properties we'd recently acquired. Normally, those retreats were for managers and key investors. But when the invitation went out, my name wasn't on it. I found out by accident when one of the site's supervisors mentioned how Emma was flying in for the weekend event. I called Dad immediately. Hey, I said, keeping my voice steady. I didn't get an invite for the retreat. There was a pause. It's more of a small strategy session this year, he said finally. Emma wanted to focus on the financial side, not the operations. Financial side? I repeated. Dad, I'm the one who. He cut me off. Daniel, let it go. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Take some time for yourself. That's when I heard her laugh in the background. Faint, but unmistakable. Is that Emma? I asked. Don't start, he said, his tone sharp now. She's helping me with a few reports. Of course she is, I said. Because I'm the one who needs to take time for myself. The call ended not long after that. And just like that, I wasn't invited to my own company's planning retreat. The following Monday, I walked into the office to find Emma sitting at my desk. My desk. She looked up, smiled politely, and said, Oh, Daniel, didn't you check your email? We're reorganizing departments. You'll be in the field office from now on. I stared at her for a moment. You're kidding. Not at all, she said sweetly. Dad thought you'd like being closer to the projects. You know, hands-on. It's what you're good at. That last sentence stung more than she probably realized. Or maybe she realized exactly what she was doing. I wanted to snap, to tell her she'd never last a day out on a construction site in the freezing wind, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, Got it. That night, I stayed late at the office. When everyone else had gone home, I logged into the old backup system, the one no one but I knew existed. Years ago, I'd set up a mirrored server for project data after losing files during a power outage. It wasn't connected to the main network anymore, but it still stored everything: financials, contracts, correspondence. That's when I found something odd. In one of the fund folders, there was a file labeled Property Reallocation Agreement, Draft. It was dated just 2 days earlier. Curious, I opened it. The document outlined a plan to transfer the ownership of one of our key development properties, one I had personally managed, from our joint fund to a newly formed holding company. The company's directors? My father and Emma. My name wasn't anywhere. My chest went tight. I scrolled to the signature lines, and though they were blank, I could see where they intended to sign. The message was clear. They were cutting me out completely. For the first time in years, I didn't feel sad or angry. I felt focused. They had finally made their move, and that meant I could make mine. I printed the document, folded it neatly, and slid it into my briefcase. Over the next week, I played dumb. I showed up at the field office, oversaw site work, signed invoices, and acted like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, I quietly met with a friend from college, Sarah, who now worked as a corporate attorney. When I showed her the document, she frowned. They can't just reallocate assets from a joint fund without your consent. You have equal ownership. That's what I thought, I said. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. What's your endgame here, Daniel? You want to fight them? I hesitated before answering. No, not yet. I want them to think they've already won. Because if there's one thing my father and sister had always underestimated, it was how much I learned from them. Years of watching their manipulation taught me patience. February rolled around, and Emma started showing up to the office more often. She made suggestions that somehow always turned into orders. She'd CC Dad on every email, making sure I looked uncooperative whenever I questioned her. One afternoon, she even called me out during a team meeting. Daniel, you didn't submit last week's progress report, she said in front of everyone. I sent it on Thursday, I replied. She smiled that perfect PR-trained smile. Well, I didn't get it. Maybe check your sent folder next time. I knew she was lying. She'd deleted my email from the shared inbox. But saying that out loud would have made me look paranoid. So I bit my tongue, nodded, and said, sure thing. After the meeting, one of the site engineers pulled me aside. Hey, man, what's going on between you and Emma? She's been off. I just shrugged. Family stuff. That was the thing about working in a family business. You couldn't ever escape the personal. Every professional decision came laced with old wounds. Every argument felt like reliving childhood all over again. Then, on Valentine's Day, it got worse. I received an official notice from the bank overseeing our fund. According to the letter, there had been a temporary suspension of disbursements due to internal restructuring. Translation: Dad and Emma were freezing the account. My name was on the notice as a partner, but I hadn't been informed or consulted. I drove straight to Dad's office. He was sitting behind his desk, flipping through a magazine when I walked in. "Why is the fund frozen?" I asked. He looked up, expression calm. "It's just a precaution. Emma's reviewing some numbers." Without telling me, "Daniel," he sighed, "you've been emotional lately. We can't have instability when real money is involved." I stared at him, trying to decide whether to laugh or scream. "Emotional? You mean because I walked out on Christmas after being humiliated?" He didn't even flinch. "You overreacted. It was a joke." I leaned forward. "You let her mock me in front of everyone, Dad." "That wasn't a joke. It was cruelty." "She didn't mean it that way," he said, waving a hand. "You're too sensitive." There it was again. That word. Sensitive. It was his favorite way of dismissing me. The same word he'd used when I was 12 and came home crying after he forgot to show up for my baseball game. The same word he used when I told him how small I felt next to Emma. Something in me hardened right then. I left his office without another word. But as I closed the door behind me, I caught a glimpse of Emma in the hallway, whispering to one of the investors. She smiled when she saw me, a smug, knowing smile. That's when I decided I was done playing defense. Over the next few weeks, I gathered everything: copies of contracts, digital correspondence, financial reports. I stayed quiet, cooperative even, but every signature they made, every minor adjustment they pushed through, I recorded. By March, they thought they had me cornered. They'd even begun discussing a phase-out plan for my role, which they claimed was for efficiency. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but I did. Sarah had helped me install a monitoring clause in our system's access logs months ago. Every document they viewed or altered under the fund's account triggered an alert to my inbox. The last alert I got came late on a Friday night. It was another reallocation draft, this time finalized. The next step would be their signatures. That's when everything started to shift. And the very next morning, I got a text from Emma. "Hey, just checking in. Have you reviewed the latest fund statement? Might be worth a look." I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because by then, the contract wasn't the only thing sitting on my desk. Something much bigger was. And that's where things started to turn in a way none of them saw coming. It was the morning of March 14th when I found out what they'd done. I woke up to a flood of unread messages, texts, emails, notifications from business accounts I didn't even know were tied to my name. My phone buzzed nonstop, vibrating across the nightstand like it was alive. When I finally picked it up, the first thing I saw was a message from our property manager. "Daniel, we've been told the ownership transfer for the Riverside lot has gone through. Should I be sending updates to Emma from now on?" For a second, I thought I'd read it wrong. Ownership transfer? I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't approved anything. But when I checked my inbox, there it was, an automated confirmation from the county registrar's office, listing the transfer of the property title from our joint fund to a new company. The name of the company? ENR Holdings, LLC. ENR, Emma and Richard. My father's first name. My hands went cold. I scrolled further and saw the document ID, the digital signature log, and my name. My signature, staring back at me, except I hadn't signed it. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my coffee untouched and going cold. Then the anger hit, the kind that doesn't explode but seeps in like poison. My father and sister had forged my signature. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to the office. The whole way there, my thoughts were a blur of disbelief and fury. The streets blurred by, spring sunlight flickering across the windshield, and all I could think was, they really did it. They actually did it. When I arrived, the receptionist, a young woman named Kelly who'd started only a few months ago, looked up from her desk and gave me that awkward smile people wear when they know something you don't. "Good morning, Daniel," she said, voice tight. "Mr. Reynolds and Emma are in the conference room." I didn't bother knocking. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. They were sitting across from each other, calm as could be. Dad looked up first. "Daniel," he said, like I'd just interrupted a friendly chat. "Good timing. We were just." "What did you do?" I snapped. Emma blinked. "Excuse me. Don't play dumb. You transferred the Riverside property. I threw my phone on the table, the screen lighting up with the document confirmation. You forged my signature. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Emma exhaled, tilting her head slightly like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Daniel, no one forged anything. It was a procedural necessity. We're restructuring the assets under a new entity. Without me, you'll still receive your share. Dad interjected quickly, voice even. Nothing's changed for you financially. I stared at him. You transferred my property into a company I'm not even part of. He gave that familiar sigh, the one that meant he was about to say something patronizing. Listen, you're overreacting again. The new company structure is for tax efficiency. Emma and I had to act fast. You were dragging your feet, and we couldn't afford delays. Tax efficiency? I repeated, laughing in disbelief. You forged my name for tax efficiency. Emma folded her hands. No one forged anything. Dad had power of attorney from the previous agreement. That stopped me cold. What power of attorney? She smiled faintly. The one you signed when the fund was created. I felt the room tilt for a second. I remembered that contract, the one from over a year ago. I'd read every clause carefully, or at least I thought I had. But there'd been an addendum page attached near the end, one that my father had insisted was just standard authorization for joint account management. I signed it without thinking twice. That's when it hit me. They'd planned this from the start. My voice came out low and steady. You manipulated me. Dad's expression hardened. Watch your tone. You used me, I said, ignoring him. You built this whole project on my work, my management, my money, and now you're pushing me out. Emma leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Daniel, we're not pushing you out. You're still part of the overall fund. But you have to admit you've been inconsistent lately. You walked out on Christmas, stopped showing up to some meetings, refused to respond to business emails for days. Investors are starting to question your stability. I almost laughed. You mean you're questioning it? Don't hide behind investors. Her voice sharpened. This isn't personal. It's business. I took a slow breath, forcing myself not to lose it. Right? Business. I grabbed my phone off the table. Then you won't mind if my lawyer takes a look at this business decision. That finally cracked her composure. Her eyes flickered to Dad, who stood up slowly, pressing both palms on the table. Daniel, he said, his voice low now. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You signed the documents. It's done. There's no reason to drag lawyers into family matters. Family matters? I said quietly. You mean like Christmas dinner? Or maybe the years of pretending I wasn't good enough to stand next to her? His jaw tightened. You're being emotional again. That was it. That word again. That same word he'd used to shut me down since I was a kid. Emotional. I repeated. No, Dad. I'm done being emotional. I'm being clear. I picked up my briefcase and headed for the door. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Behind me, Emma said something under her breath, but I didn't catch it. I didn't care. I left the office and didn't look back. By the time I got home, the anger had burned into something colder, resolve. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at my desk, and started going through the backup server again. This time, I wasn't just looking for contracts. I wanted proof, emails, message logs, timestamps, anything that showed intent. It didn't take long. Buried in a shared folder labeled Meeting Notes, Internal Use, was a series of draft memos. Each one was written by Emma, detailing the transition plan for our assets. One of them even included a line that made my stomach turn. Once Daniel's share is transferred under ENR Holdings, we can restructure the agreement to minimize his involvement. Dad believes he'll calm down eventually. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I printed the memo, along with every related document, and filed them neatly in a binder. A few hours later, I got a text from Mom. Your father told me you're being difficult again. Please don't make things worse for yourself. You know how he gets when he's stressed. That hit harder than I wanted to admit. My own mother, always the peacekeeper, always siding with the stronger voice. For years she'd played the role of mediator, but never once had she actually defended me. It was always, don't fight with your father, or Emma didn't mean it that way. I didn't even reply. Instead, I called Sarah, my lawyer friend. I told her everything. The forged signature, the transfer, the old contract clause. She was silent for a moment, then said, they overplayed their hand. I can file an injunction by tomorrow morning. If we act fast, we can freeze all assets under the fund until this is resolved. I nodded. Do it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the years I'd spent trying to be good enough for them. Every late night at the office. Every project I saved. Every, you'll get there someday, pat on the back that meant nothing. By dawn, something inside me had hardened completely. I wasn't the same Daniel they'd spent years underestimating. When I walked into the office the next day, people looked at me differently. Word travels fast in family businesses, faster than truth. Emma must have already spun her version of the story, because I caught snippets of conversation as I passed. He's suing his own family? Guess the rumors were true. I heard he's unstable. I didn't care. I went straight to my office, shut the door, and waited for the call. At 10:17 a.m., Sarah texted. Injunction filed. They've been served. Not 5 minutes later, my office phone rang. It was Dad. Daniel, he said, his voice tight. What have you done? I leaned back in my chair. I just made sure my assets stopped disappearing without my consent. You froze the account, he snapped. Do you have any idea what that does to our liquidity? To the contractors depending on those funds. Maybe you should have thought about that before stealing from me. This isn't stealing, he hissed. This is business. You're destroying our reputation. I laughed quietly. You already did that when you taught your daughter that betrayal is just another negotiation tactic. There was a pause, and then his voice lowered to something almost venomous. You're finished here, Daniel. Don't ever come back to this office again. He hung up. For a long time, I just sat there. Then I smiled, not out of joy, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being cornered. But just as I was beginning to think I had regained control, the real betrayal hit. Later that week, I received an email from our bank, a formal notice stating that my access to the business account had been revoked due to a change in managing authority. It didn't make sense. I was one of the signatories. When I called to demand an explanation, the representative hesitated before saying, according to the documents on file, your shares have been liquidated. The funds were transferred to ENR Holdings. I felt my throat go dry. What documents? Signed authorization forms, the rep said. Filed by your father, under power of attorney. I ended the call and just sat there, motionless. It was over. They hadn't just stolen one property. They'd taken everything. The fund, the assets, the company's shares. All of it. And that's when I realized something even worse. They hadn't done it out of greed. They'd done it to break me. They wanted me gone. And I was ready to make them regret it. The following days were a blur, a heavy, colorless fog that swallowed everything I'd built. I woke up every morning to new messages from banks, lawyers, and clients, each one like a nail being driven deeper. The words authorization revoked, account restructured, contract reassigned, repeated so often that they stopped feeling real. The company email stopped working first. I tried logging in one morning, and the system just said, access denied. Then my work phone was disconnected. The next day, I got a letter, delivered by courier, of course, terminating my position due to irreconcilable differences and breach of trust. Breach of trust. That one stung. They took everything I'd built, and somehow I was the one who'd breached something. It wasn't even about money at that point. It was about erasure. They'd gone beyond cutting me out of the business. They were rewriting the story to make it seem like I'd never mattered. My father was giving interviews about restructuring the family enterprise, talking about a streamlined leadership team focused on the next generation. Emma, naturally, was the face of it all. Her photo was everywhere, polished, confident, sitting beside Dad at board meetings like she'd earned it. And me? I was a ghost. The house felt different, too. Colder. My desk at home, once covered in project notes and blueprints, sat empty except for a single framed photo. Me, Dad, and Emma from 10 years ago, all in hard hats, standing on a construction site. Dad's arm was around her shoulder. Mine was empty. I stared at it for a long time, realizing it had always been that way. Still, I tried to fight. I really did. Sarah helped me file a lawsuit challenging the forged signatures and unauthorized transfers. For a moment, I thought maybe the truth would win. But Dad's lawyers were faster, sharper, and, most importantly, richer. They buried us under motions, delays, and technicalities. Every time I thought I'd made progress, another door slammed shut. 3 weeks later, the judge denied the injunction. The assets remained frozen, but under their control, not mine. Sarah told me it was temporary, that we could appeal, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice. Daniel, she said one night over the phone, they've spent months preparing for this. You were blindsided. I just want what's mine, I said quietly. I know, she replied. But they've turned this into a war of attrition. They think you'll run out of energy or money. And she was right about the money part. My savings were bleeding out fast. I hadn't realized how much of my personal finances were intertwined with the business, the car lease, the mortgage, even the insurance plans. All company linked. By the start of April, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a spreadsheet that told me I had maybe 2 months before I'd have to sell the house. It was strange, though. Losing everything didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like the sound of a door closing softly after someone walks out. I remember one morning waking up to sunlight streaming through the blinds, hearing birds outside, and realizing for the first time in years that I didn't have anywhere to be. No meetings, no calls, no reports. Just silence. It should have felt like freedom. It didn't. It felt like I'd been erased. Mom called a few times during those weeks, leaving voicemails filled with guilt and half-hearted concern. Your father's worried about you, she said in one. You need to stop this fight, Daniel. It's tearing the family apart. I deleted every message without listening to the end. One afternoon, I got a knock at the door. It was Emma. She looked flawless, as always. Perfectly styled hair, expensive coat, sunglasses perched on her head like she'd just stepped out of a magazine cover. She held a manila envelope in her hand. Can I come in? She asked. I didn't move. What do you want? She sighed, giving that rehearsed look of concern. Dad thought it might be better if we settled this privately. You're only making things worse for yourself, Daniel. I crossed my arms. Worse than losing everything. Her eyes softened, though I could tell it was fake. You're making this emotional again. You've always been too. Don't. I cut her off. Don't say it. She hesitated, then handed me the envelope. It's an offer. We're willing to buy out your shares. You'll get a fair payout and can move on with your life. I opened it. Inside was a typed agreement and a check. The number on it made me laugh, loudly, bitterly. It was barely a fraction of what my investment alone had been worth. This is an insult, I said, tossing the paper back at her. It's generous, she replied coolly, considering you almost tanked the company with your little stunt. By trying to stop you from stealing it. By making it public, she snapped. Do you have any idea how much damage control I had to do? Investors panicked. We almost lost a major deal. There it was again, we. Always we. As if I'd never existed. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You could have done this the right way, Emma. We could have built something together. But you and Dad decided the only way to win was to erase me. She met my gaze without flinching. Because you were never built for this, Daniel. You always wanted to be liked, not respected. Dad needed someone ruthless. I felt my pulse in my jaw. Congratulations, I said quietly. You found your perfect reflection. She didn't respond. Just picked up the envelope and turned to leave. But before she did, she paused by the door. You know, she said softly, if you'd just stayed in your lane, you'd still have a place here. And then she was gone. That night, I sat in the dark for hours. The anger had burned itself out. What was left was a dull ache, disappointment, betrayal, exhaustion. I poured myself a drink, stared at the ceiling, and thought about everything I'd done for them. Every sacrifice. Every time I'd stayed late to fix something just so Dad wouldn't have to. Every time I let Emma take credit just to keep the peace. And it hit me. This wasn't just a one-time betrayal. It was the final act of a lifetime pattern. They'd always taken. I'd always given. Something needed to change. The next morning, I made coffee and sat down at my desk. For the first time in weeks, I didn't open legal documents or financial reports. I opened a blank notebook. I started writing down names. People I'd worked with over the years, contractors, architects, property brokers, clients. People who knew me, trusted me, owed me favors, or at least respected my work. I didn't know exactly what I was planning yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to crawl back. That afternoon, I met with Sarah again. She looked exhausted but proud. You still want to keep fighting? She asked. I shook my head. No, I want to build something new. She smiled faintly. Now you sound like your dad. No, I said quietly. I sound like someone who finally learned from him. I spent the next few weeks doing something that surprised even me, walking away. I stopped replying to their letters. I withdrew the lawsuit. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy, because I'd realized something. As long as I kept fighting them on their turf, I'd never win. They controlled the money, the lawyers, the narrative. But outside of that, they had no idea how to stand without me. Meanwhile, I started making quiet moves, reaching out to old contacts, gathering data, rebuilding connections. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, not even Sarah. I just said I needed time. The bitterness was still there, but it started turning into something sharper, colder, purposeful. Every night, I'd sit at that same desk, staring at the old photo of the three of us. And every night, I'd remind myself of the look on Emma's face when I refused her deal. That flash of irritation behind the calm. That tiny crack in her armor. They thought they destroyed me. But what they didn't realize was that I'd stopped trying to get back what was taken. Now, I wanted something else entirely. I wanted them to need me again and realize too late that I was gone. And quietly, patiently, I started laying the groundwork for that day. The strange thing about losing everything is that once it's all gone, you stop being afraid of it happening again. There's a quiet freedom in having nothing left for people to take. That realization changed something in me, hardened me, maybe, but also made me sharper than I'd ever been. It started small. A favor here, a phone call there. People I hadn't spoken to in years, subcontractors, old clients, even a few city permit officers, reached out once they heard I'd left my father's company. Most of them assumed I'd been pushed out, but they didn't ask for details. They just said things like, "Sorry it went down that way, Daniel. You were the only one who ever treated us fair." That surprised me at first. For years, I'd thought of myself as invisible, the one who did the grunt work while Emma got the praise. But outside those walls, people had noticed. They remembered who actually solved problems instead of passing blame. By mid-May, I had a list of contacts longer than I expected. I didn't have money, at least, not much, but I had credibility. And that, I realized, was worth something. I started meeting with people in quiet coffee shops and half-finished construction sites, pitching ideas I'd been sitting on for years: modern eco-housing, sustainable renovations for old city buildings, small-scale projects with big impact. The kind of ideas Dad would have laughed at for not being profitable enough. At first, it felt strange working alone. No office, no staff, no fancy logo. Just me, my laptop, and a rented co-working desk downtown. But every time I sat there drafting a proposal, it felt like I could breathe again. No more walking on eggshells, no more second-guessing every word. One day, an old client named Howard called me out of the blue. He was a developer who'd worked with our family company years ago on a big riverfront project, one Emma had nearly ruined by pushing an unrealistic deadline. "I heard about the split," he said. "Sorry, kid, but honestly, you're better off. Your dad's company hasn't been the same since you left." "Thanks," I said carefully. "I'm working on something new. Smaller scale, but cleaner." He chuckled. "You always were the practical one. Send me your plans. Maybe I'll throw you a project to get started." That was the first spark. Within a month, Howard introduced me to another investor, then another. One of them, a retired architect named Linda, told me over lunch, "I'd rather put my money behind someone who knows the ground than someone who just gives orders from a desk." That sentence stuck with me. Someone who knows the ground. That's what I built my new company around. Hands-on, transparent, built from the ground up. I named it Groundline Developments. It started with a single project, a mid-size renovation on the outskirts of the city. Nothing glamorous, but it was mine. Every nail, every blueprint, every permit went through me. I hired the same workers my father had laid off years earlier when he streamlined operations. They were loyal. They remembered how I treated them when I was just a project coordinator. And they worked like they wanted to prove something, too. We finished the first site under budget and ahead of schedule. The client was thrilled. 2 more contracts came in right after. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was building again. It was late June when I got my first taste of poetic irony. A supplier I'd used for years called me, sounding nervous. "Hey, Daniel, small heads up," he said. "Your sister reached out. She wanted to move all future contracts from your dad's company to exclusive terms with us. Thought you should know." I smiled. "And what did you say?" He laughed. "I told her we're already under contract with you." That moment stayed with me for days. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was the first flicker of balance tilting back in my favor. Meanwhile, I kept things quiet. I didn't post about Groundline. I didn't announce anything. I wanted to grow under the radar, out of sight, out of reach. My father and Emma had the name, the connections, and the press. But I had something better, people who actually trusted me. By late summer, things snowballed faster than I could have imagined. A local magazine ran a feature titled The Rebirth of Honest Building. It mentioned Ground Line, calling it a rare example of ethical construction in an industry riddled with shortcuts. The article even quoted Howard saying, "Daniel Reynolds is the future of this city's development, practical, steady, and visionary." The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had spent decades trying to get that kind of reputation. I'd stumbled into it by simply doing the opposite of him. A few weeks after that article came out, I was invited to speak at a sustainability conference. Just a small local event, nothing major. But when I stepped on that stage and saw the crowd, builders, investors, young architects, I realized I wasn't invisible anymore. After my talk, a man in a gray suit approached me. "You're Richard Reynolds' son, right?" he asked. I nodded, a little wary. He smiled. "I did some contracting for your dad back in the day. Heard you're doing things differently. It's refreshing. You ever think about expanding?" I didn't answer immediately, because I had been thinking about it. A lot. Ground Line was growing faster than I could handle alone. I'd been reinvesting every cent into new projects, but we were nearing the point where I needed serious funding. That man, his name was Alan Price, turned out to be exactly the kind of partner I needed. A quiet investor with deep pockets and zero interest in publicity. "I don't want control," he said when we met again. "I just want to back someone who still believes integrity can make money." That sealed it. Within a month, Alan had invested enough for me to open a second office. Ironically, in the same district as my father's headquarters. It was strange driving past that old building again. The same logo still hung over the entrance, but the parking lot was half empty. The rumor was that their latest development had stalled due to budgetary mismanagement. I knew what that meant. They'd overreached, as always, counting on appearances over planning. And it didn't surprise me when, a few weeks later, I got a call from an old colleague who still worked for them. "Daniel," he said carefully, "you didn't hear this from me, but things over there are falling apart. Emma's been arguing with your dad nonstop. Investors are nervous. They lost 2 major clients. Both switched to independent developers." I said nothing, but I didn't have to ask who those clients were. I already knew. By fall, Ground Line had 5 projects under construction. We were profitable. I'd hired back several people from my father's company, not out of pity, but because they deserved better leadership. I started sleeping again. Real sleep, not the anxious, shallow kind that had haunted me for years. My mornings were quiet, peaceful. Coffee at sunrise, calls with teams who respected me, evenings spent walking through job sites instead of arguing in glass offices. And yet, there was a part of me that stayed cold, that remembered every word, every smirk, every toast at that Christmas table. I didn't dwell on revenge, but I didn't forget it either. One Friday evening, I got a call I didn't expect. It was Mom. "Daniel," she said softly, "your father's worried." I almost laughed. "Worried about what?" "That I'm still breathing." "Don't be cruel," she said quickly. "He's struggling. Business isn't good." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm sure Emma's got it handled." There was a pause. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "They haven't spoken in weeks." That stopped me. "What?" "She blames him for a deal that fell through. He blames her for bad management." "It's ugly, Daniel. I don't even go into the office anymore." I said nothing. For years, they'd treated me like an outsider, and now they were turning on each other. "Your father asked me to tell you," Mom continued hesitantly, "that he'd like to meet. He said maybe it's time to talk." I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Tell him I'm busy." That night, I sat alone in my office, watching the city lights flicker outside the window. My company, was thriving. The people who dismissed me were faltering. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. This wasn't revenge. Not the real kind. Revenge wasn't proving them wrong. It was making them realize they'd destroyed the very thing that could have saved them. And I had a feeling that day was coming soon. Because just as Ground Line reached its peak, a new opportunity landed in my lap. One that would bring everything full circle. An investment firm contacted me about a property auction, a half-developed lot along the river. It was familiar, too familiar. The same one my father and Emma had stolen from me months ago. ENR Holdings was selling it off at a loss. The contract sat open on my screen, glowing softly in the dark. I didn't sign it that night. I just stared at the number, the same way I had when Emma called crying weeks before. And this time I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, the balance of power wasn't just shifting. It was already mine. When I saw the property listing that night, I sat back in my chair and let out a quiet laugh. There it was, the same riverside development that had started everything. The land they'd stolen with forged signatures. The project they'd built their empire around. Now it was up for auction, bleeding money. I clicked through the documents. Half-built infrastructure, unpaid contractors, pending lawsuits from environmental regulators. Whoever took it over would inherit a disaster. To most investors, it was toxic. But to me, it was poetry. I called Alan first thing in the morning. "You still in the mood for a challenge?" I asked. He chuckled. "You sound like you've got something dangerous in mind." "Not dangerous," I said. "Just poetic." I showed him the file. He skimmed it, raised an eyebrow, and smiled. "You really want this?" "I need this," I said simply. Within 2 weeks, Groundline Developments had quietly entered the bidding process under a shell company I'd set up years ago, one that didn't carry my name. The goal was simple. No one could know it was me. If Dad or Emma caught even a whiff of my involvement, they'd pull every string they had to block it. The auction day arrived on a gray Thursday morning in November. I sat in a conference room downtown, coffee in hand, surrounded by a dozen other bidders. The representative from ENR Holdings was there too, a tall man in a navy suit. Emma wasn't present, but her signature was on every document. That alone made it satisfying. The bidding started low. Numbers climbed. People dropped out one by one. The property was toxic, yes, but valuable in the right hands, especially if those hands already knew every hidden flaw, every corner they'd cut, every lie they'd told investors to inflate its value. By the final round, only 2 bidders remained, a mid-tier developer from Chicago and my shell company. "Final call," the auctioneer said. "Any further bids?" I raised my paddle. 3.6. Silence. Then the auctioneer's gavel came down. "Sold." I didn't smile right away. I just sat there, calm, steady. My chest felt tight in that slow, controlled way that comes from watching a loop finally close. After the paperwork was finalized, Alan turned to me. "You just bought your father's legacy." "No," I said. "I bought his mistake." We began work within a week. The site was a mess, half-finished foundations, incomplete permits, unpaid workers. But unlike them, I didn't rely on shortcuts. We stripped everything back to clean ground and rebuilt properly. Within 3 months, the project that had bankrupted ENR Holdings was turning into a sleek, sustainable residential complex. Investors loved it. The city loved it. And I made sure everyone knew it was a Groundline project. By the time the marketing banners went up, the name ENR Holdings had become synonymous with failure. That's when the phone calls started. First came the contractors. "Your dad's company still owes us money," one said. "They promised payment months ago." Then came the suppliers. "We're switching over to you, Daniel." They can't even cover invoices. It wasn't intentional revenge, at least not at first. It was just the natural gravity of reputation. But as their house of cards started collapsing, I realized how much they had depended on the illusion of control. Without the property, without me, their foundation crumbled. And then came the call I'd been waiting for. I was in my office late one evening when my phone buzzed. The caller ID read private number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Daniel," came my father's voice. I leaned back in my chair, letting a long silence stretch. "You must be desperate." "Don't do that," he said sharply. His voice sounded different, thinner, older. "We need to talk." "About what?" "The Riverside development." I smiled faintly. "Oh, you mean my development?" He hesitated. "You bought it." "I know it was you." "I didn't buy it," I said calmly. "My company did. I just happened to build something out of the ashes you left." He was quiet for a long time before saying, "We could have worked together, you know. I was trying to protect what I built." "By stealing from me?" "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I said, my tone flat. "You took what wasn't yours, called it family, and expected me to be grateful." His voice broke slightly. "You don't understand what it's like to carry a business, to have everyone depending on you." "I do," I said quietly, "because now I'm the one they depend on." There was another silence. Then he said softly, "Emma's leaving. She's moving to New York. Investors pulled out. She says I ruined everything." I stared out the window, watching the reflection of the city lights shimmer against the glass. She's right, I said. He exhaled shakily. I just wanted this family to stay together. Families don't stay together by control, I said. They stay together by trust. And you broke every ounce of it. He didn't respond. Then, finally, he whispered, "So that's it." I thought for a long moment before answering. "No, Dad. That's balance." I hung up. After that, everything moved fast. The Riverside project opened in March, a clean, modern development that sold out within weeks. Groundline's reputation skyrocketed. Journalists called it a comeback story that redefined resilience. One article even mentioned how the site had once belonged to a failed family venture. No names, but everyone knew. And that's when Emma reached out. Her email came late at night. Short, polished, polite. "Daniel, congratulations on the Riverside project. It's impressive work. I was wondering if you'd be open to a meeting. There might be room for collaboration, or at least closure." Closure. That word tasted like irony. Still, I agreed. We met at a small restaurant downtown, the kind of neutral territory where people pretend to be civil. She looked different, tired, maybe even humbled. But the confidence was still there, that corporate poise that never cracked fully. "I'll get straight to it," she said. "Dad's company is dissolving. The board wants to sell the remaining assets before the debts pile any higher. There's an opportunity for you to acquire what's left." I took a sip of my drink. "And why would I want that?" She hesitated. "Because it's still the Reynolds name. You could restore it." I smiled. "No, Emma. I built my own." For the first time, I saw it, a flicker of regret in her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but realization. "You really did it," she said softly. "You actually made it without us." I nodded. "That's what happens when you stop begging for a seat at the table and build your own instead." She looked down. "I never thought you'd become this." "Neither did Dad," I said. "But that's what made it possible." She pushed the folder across the table. "Then take it. The company, the name, all of it. End this cycle." I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "No, you keep it. Let it remind you what happens when you build something on lies." She didn't argue, just nodded slowly, stood up, and left without another word. When she was gone, I leaned back and exhaled. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure, quiet, heavy, and final. A week later, ENR Holdings officially filed for bankruptcy. The news barely made headlines, overshadowed by Groundline's newest announcement, a multi-city development partnership that would make us one of the largest independent builders in the region. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just went to the Riverside site one last time. The building stood tall against the skyline, clean lines of steel and glass reflecting the sunset. Workers laughed on their break nearby. It was peaceful, something the Reynolds name had never been. As I stood there, phone buzzing in my pocket with new contracts and calls, I realized the revenge was already complete. Not in lawsuits or headlines, but in silence, in watching everything they built collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. And as the wind brushed across the river, I said quietly, almost to myself, "Enjoy it, Emma. You wanted me gone. Now you finally got your wish." Then I walked away, leaving the ghosts of my old life behind. But even as I did, part of me knew this story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes, when people lose power, they don't vanish, they crawl back. And I had a feeling one of them was about to. It was almost poetic how quietly it all ended. No courtroom battles, no angry confrontations, just the slow, inevitable unraveling of everything they'd once built. Within a month of the bankruptcy filing, my father's company was liquidated. The building that had once been his pride, that glass and steel monument to control, went up for sale. I didn't buy it. I didn't need to. Another developer turned it into office space for a marketing agency. The Reynolds name was stripped off the front in less than a week. I saw it happen by chance. I'd driven by on my way to a Groundline meeting, and there they were, two workers on a ladder, unscrewing the steel letters from the facade. I pulled over and watched from my car. The metal R, the one that used to shine brightest in the morning sun, clattered onto the pavement, leaving a faint outline of where it had been bolted for decades. That sound, that soft metallic thud, felt like the closing note to a symphony that had played for far too long. Dad's health went downhill soon after. The stress, the debt, the public embarrassment, it all caught up. I got a call from Mom one evening telling me he'd been hospitalized after a mild heart attack. Her voice trembled when she said my name. "He keeps asking for you," she whispered. I didn't answer right away. There was a long silence before I finally said, "I hope he gets better," and hung up. For weeks, I didn't go. Part of me wanted to, out of duty or nostalgia or something that still felt unfinished. But every time I thought about it, I remembered the night he looked me in the eye and said I was too emotional to lead. I remembered signing that contract he'd used against me. I remembered Christmas dinner, the laughter, the toast, the humiliation. Then one morning, I got another call. This time, from the hospital itself. "Mr. Reynolds," the nurse said softly, "your father's asking if you'll come see him. He doesn't have much time." I almost said no, but something in her voice, gentle, human, made me pause. So I went. He looked smaller than I remembered. The man who once filled every room with presence now lay surrounded by machines, his voice faint and dry. His eyes flicked toward me when I entered. "You came," he whispered. I did. He nodded weakly, a ghost of his old pride flickering behind tired eyes. "I wanted to fix it," he said slowly. "But I didn't know how." I didn't speak. He took a shallow breath. "I thought power would keep the family together. I didn't realize it was what tore it apart." His hand trembled slightly, reaching toward mine. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I let him take it. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. We didn't say much else. When I left the hospital that night, I knew I wouldn't see him again. And a week later, I didn't. At his funeral, only a small group attended. A few former employees, Mom, and Emma. The casket was simple. The speeches were short. Emma cried through most of it, though I couldn't tell if it was guilt, grief, or both. After the service, she approached me. Her eyes were red, mascara smudged. "I'm selling my apartment," she said quietly. "I can't stay here anymore." I nodded. "Probably for the best." She hesitated. "Do you ever regret how it all ended?" I looked at her, the sister who had once raised a glass to my humiliation, who'd built her career on betrayal, who'd lost everything trying to win a game I stopped playing. "No," I said finally. "I regret not walking away sooner." She stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You really became him, you know." I shook my head. "No, Emma. I became what he could have been, if he'd ever learned to let go." She didn't reply, just turned and walked toward the car waiting at the curb. That was the last time I saw her. Months passed. Groundline grew faster than I could have imagined. We expanded into 3 cities, opened new offices, and built homes that carried my company's name, not out of vanity, but legacy. Real legacy. The kind built on trust, not control. One spring morning, as I walked through the Riverside site, now complete, with families moving in and children playing in the park we'd built, I noticed an old man sitting on a bench nearby, reading a newspaper. For a split second, I saw my father's face in him. Proud, quiet, content. It wasn't him, of course, but the image lingered. I sat down for a moment, watching the sunlight hit the river, and thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the betrayal, the loss. All of it had led me here. Some people spend their lives chasing approval. Others spend it running from failure. I'd done both. But sitting there, surrounded by something I built on my own terms, I realized I'd finally stopped running. When I stood up to leave, a little boy ran past me, holding his mother's hand, laughing. "Mom, look at the buildings," he shouted. "They said the man who made them used to work with his family, but then did it better." His mother smiled. "That's how you build something strong," she said. "You do it right, even when no one believes you can." I smiled faintly and started walking. As I reached the end of the path, the wind from the river picked up, carrying the faint sound of construction from a nearby site. Steel, hammers, progress. The kind of sound my father once lived for. And for the first time, I didn't hear it as noise. I heard it as peace. Because everything they'd taken from me, every betrayal, every cruel word, every dismissal, had only built the foundation for something stronger. In the end, they'd given me exactly what I needed. Freedom. And as I looked back one last time at the river glinting beneath the morning sun, I whispered to the wind, not in anger, not in triumph, but in truth. This time, I built it right.